Growing up in Southern California, I was always a bit of a thrill seeker. I loved skateboarding, mountain biking, and pretty much anything else that could give me an adrenaline rush. It wasn't surprising then that, when I was older, I decided to become a security officer. I mean, the idea of protecting people and the possibility of being in a situation where I needed to react quickly really appealed to me. It was during my time as an officer that I began to explore the many beautiful parks and hiking trails all throughout Southern California. Along with the adrenaline-seeking activities, I also developed an interest in photography. I found solace in capturing stunning vistas and candid moments on my hikes, sharing them on social media as a way to connect with others who appreciated the beauty of nature and landscape photography. Sometimes, I would even be assigned to patrol these very parks and trails as part of my job, ensuring the safety of visitors, which only furthered my love for the great outdoors. I always look forward to these assignments, as they allowed me to combine my passion for photography and nature, all while fulfilling my duty as a security officer. So one day, I received an assignment to patrol a lesser-known park in a more remote area of Southern California. I was both excited and nervous, since I had never been to that particular park before. I was aware that its isolated location could potentially attract some unsavory types. Nonetheless, I was still up for the challenge and even eagerly set off on my day's work. Upon arriving at the park, immediately, I began my usual routine of walking the trails, taking photographs, and just trying to keep an eye out for anything unusual. The park was beautiful, with its thick, dense foliage, rugged hills, and breathtaking views of the surrounding landscape. The trails would snake through the terrain, some following the edge of steep cliffs that offered magnificent vantage points for capturing these sweeping vistas below. As I continued my hike, I noticed that there were very few other visitors at the park that day. While the tranquility was welcome, it also made me feel somewhat uneasy. In a place like this, it would be all too easy for someone with malicious intentions to carry out their plans unnoticed. Now, as I rounded a bend on one of the trails, I came across a couple who appeared to be having an argument. Trying not to draw attention to myself because it was awkward already, I slowed my pace and just casually approached them, all the while observing their body language and listening for any signs that the situation could potentially escalate. As I got closer, I heard the man beginning to raise his voice and noticed him gripping the woman's arm firmly. Now at this point, I felt it necessary to intervene. Remaining calm and professional, I introduced myself as a security officer assigned to patrol the park and inquired if everything was all right. Now the man, being somewhat startled by my sudden appearance, quickly released the woman's arm and muttered something about it being a private matter. I simply maintained my composure and insisted that, as a security officer, it was my duty to ensure the safety of all visitors, and if there was an issue, I was there to help. Now the woman was visibly shaken at this point and thanked me and explained that they were just having a disagreement, but it was nothing to be concerned about. I politely nodded my head and walked away. I was no more than 200 feet away when I heard them both begin to scream. Immediately, I stopped what I was doing and sprinted back to the location of where they were. They were uphill from me, so it took me about a minute to run back there as I couldn't see what had happened. When I got to the spot that the couple was before, they were gone, and some trickles of blood were on the ground. From my location, I had a very good line of sight all around me. There was no way they could have just vanished, and not even 20 feet away was a cliff. I looked down it, they were nowhere, so they clearly had not fallen down the cliff, and they were nowhere around. And yet, there was this small puddle of blood right at my feet. I immediately called backup, and rangers and police were now involved. That's about where my personal involvement in this case ends. Are you ready for the weirdness? So get this. Apparently, the couple was found completely unscathed about 0.8 miles away from that location in the wilderness in completely different clothing, having no idea how they got there or what had happened. Apparently, the last thing they remember was arguing, and they even remembered me coming up to them and talking. I have no way to explain this away, and even telling this story gives me the creeps, because it's just so... It feels like I'm telling an X-Files story. It just doesn't feel real. But anyway, that's been my only brush with something that seems to defy all rational thought and explanation. After that, I only worked as a security officer for an additional 6 years and then changed professions entirely. It's been a few years since I retired from search and rescue, but I thought I'd share a story from my time working just outside of Yosemite National Park. The experience has stuck with me well into retirement now, and I think writing it down might serve as a form of closure. I've chosen to leave out specific names and locations for the sake of privacy. It was the summer of 2002. Our team had just settled in for a few slow months, as the majority of tourists had already come and gone from the park. However, on this particular evening, we got a call about a group of 6 hikers who had gone missing the day before. Their expected return time had been early that morning, and when they hadn't made contact with their family members by evening, the family members decided to alert the authorities. So as we prepared our equipment and received further information, we pieced together the details of the case. The hikers were co-workers from a tech firm, visiting the park for a team-building excursion, all in their late 20s to early 30s. They were all well prepared in terms of gear and provisions, but inexperienced in navigating the wilderness. Fueled by adrenaline, our search and rescue team wasted no time in setting off into the dense forest near the park's border. We trekked deeper into the mountains, and I couldn't help but feel an unsettling sense of uneasiness. The air would grow thick with tension, and the encroaching darkness only heightened my concern for the group's safety. Now, throughout the first night, we found little evidence of their whereabouts, aside from a discarded water bottle and a hastily made fire pit. While these clues gave us the slightest hope that the hikers might be alive, I felt overwhelmed by the vastness of the wilderness and our dwindling chances of finding them in time. Sleep was scarce, as the worry gnawed at all of us. Now the following day, the daylight crept through the trees and our search continued with increased intensity, knowing time was of little essence. We began to find more signs of their presence, boot prints in the mud, and remnants of torn clothing snagged on branches. Their trail seemed to lead us deeper into the less traveled area of the woods, far from any marked trails. So we continued our pursuit, and we found a hidden cavern behind a dense thicket. Inside were 3 of the 6 hikers, huddled together and visibly traumatized. After finding them, providing them with food and water, they explained that the other half of their group had gone to search for help when it became clear they were hopelessly lost. We quickly contacted our base and informed them of the situation. With only half the group accounted for, the urgency of our search was renewed. So we split into 2 teams, one to escort the found hikers back to safety, and the other to continue searching for the remaining 3. My team ventured further, following the increasingly erratic tracks the missing hikers had left in their desperate search for help. The trail led us to the edge of a treacherous ravine, and my heart sank as I stared down into it. A foreboding feeling washed over me, and I sensed that tragedy was close at hand. Hours passed, and the sun set behind the mountains once more. Now suddenly, one of our search dogs picked up a scent, and we were led to a small natural shelter hidden within the trees. Upon entering, we found two of the remaining hikers. One was unconscious, and the other was in a clear state of delirium, muttering about a tall figure with black eyes that had been stalking them. The injured hiker had a broken ankle, which we quickly tended to as best as we could. As we prepared to transport them back to base, the delirious hiker continued to speak of the tall figure, growing increasingly agitated. Deciding to press forward and search for the final missing person, we left extra supplies and a flare gun with the injured hiker, instructing them to fire it if anything out of the ordinary occurred. As we continued our search, we heard the chilling sound of distant laughter echoing through the forest, a reminder of the last missing member of the group. A feeling of darkness fell upon the team, but our determination pushed us onward. Just as the last rays of sunlight disappeared from the horizon, we found the final hiker perched in a tree, wild-eyed and sobbing maniacally. She claimed that the tall figure had pursued her relentlessly, but could not reach her in the tree. We managed to get her to come down and hurried back to the ravine to retrieve the other two. The team radioed for extraction, and within an hour, a chopper arrived to lift the remaining hikers to safety. As they vanished off into the night, our focus shifted to the unusual, horrifying events of the search. Now looking back on it, I can't help but be haunted by the presence that seemed to linger throughout our search. Despite the success of the operation, the chilling encounter with the tall figure with black eyes continues to bother me. I mean, sometimes I can't help but wonder what might have happened had we never embarked on that expedition. The wilderness is a very unforgiving place, and there are undoubtedly things beyond our comprehension lurking within it. But as long as people venture where they shouldn't, search and rescue teams will be there to bring them back, even if it means facing the unknown. It was around the middle of June when my friends and I decided to embark on an adventure we'd been planning for months. We lived in a small, unassuming town just north of Santa Barbara, and we often fantasized about discovering something extraordinary, something that would make our mundane lives just a little more thrilling. My name is Mark, and I was 19 at this time. The four of us, myself, along with my friends Jason, Sarah, and Rachel, had pretty much grown up together in a sleepy little town. We always dreamt of exploring, abandoned haunted houses and old insane asylums, just the ones that dot the northern outskirts, the relics of a once flourishing community that had eventually succumbed to economic hardships. So finally, with the summer upon us and time to spare, we set out to do just that. One sunny afternoon, we grabbed our water bottles, our flashlights, and our adventurous spirits, making our way to the first place on our list. Now, we had heard stories of other people's encounters in these weird places, some of which were nothing short of unsettling. But despite this, the thrill of the unknown propelled us forward. Upon reaching the first house, we discovered it was more dilapidated than we initially thought. The facade was peeling, windows were shattered, and the door was hanging off its hinges. But we remained determined and stepped inside. The place was dark, with only occasional rays of sunlight filtering in through broken windows, and our flashlights cast eerie shadows on the crumbling walls, adding a sense of darkness that began to swell within us. So we started exploring the rooms, which were strewn with debris, remnants of the home's previous inhabitants. Some still contained furniture, though it had been ravaged by time and vandalism. The air was dusty and smelled of mildew, a testament to the years of neglect. In each room, we searched for anything of interest, though most were empty or filled with broken, dirty objects. However, Jason, who possessed a penchant for finding hidden treasures, discovered a dusty trunk in the attic. It was rusted shut, but with a little effort we managed to pry it open. Now inside, we found a variety of old belongings. We're talking like worn clothing, photographs, old heirlooms, and a few pieces of jewelry, all coated in a thick layer of dust. It was like peering into the past, lives of those who once lived there, a tangible connection to a time before. And just as we're contemplating our find, we heard footsteps outside the house. Startled, we thought we were going to be in huge trouble. So we turned off our flashlights, standing completely still. And suddenly, a figure had appeared in the doorway. We held our breath, afraid to make a sound. It was a man, seemingly in his 40s, with messy hair and clothes that matched the state of the house. Jason mustered the courage to speak. "Hi," he said hesitantly. "We were just exploring. We're not here to cause any trouble." The man looked at us, his eyes scanning our faces. He then spoke. "My name's Peter. I used to live here," he said in a gravelly voice. He told us that after losing his job, he was forced to leave his home, unable to keep up with payments. While we were startled by his sudden appearance, we found ourselves sympathizing with his story. Eventually, the sun dipped below the horizon, and we needed to leave. Peter wished us luck on our exploration, warning us to be careful, and it turned out that some other abandoned houses had become a haven for criminal activity. Heeding his advice, we proceeded cautiously to the next one. This one appeared as though it had been vacant for a lesser amount of time, with graffiti adorning the exterior. As we stepped inside, the atmosphere felt different, much more menacing, different than the last one. Rachel, sensitive to the mood, clung to my arm and her voice became shaky. "I don't like this place." Though we felt really disturbed, our curiosity had already been piqued. The first dorm we entered had a foul smell emanating from the corner. There, we discovered a decaying animal carcass, covered in flies. Sarah gagged, quickly backing out of the room. We decided not to linger, moving to explore the rest of the house. Our sense never left us as we ventured through these dark rooms. We found neither the history nor the intrigue that had captivated us in the first house. Instead, we were only met with an overwhelming sadness, as though we were trespassing through someone's grief. Without warning, footsteps echoed through the hall, sending our hearts racing. We huddled together in the nearest room, our flashlights extinguished, waiting for the intruder with bated breath. This time, there was no casual exchange, no story of loss. Instead, the figure darted past us, snatching the bag containing our earlier discoveries as they fled. We were stunned, but quickly realized that attempting to chase down the thief was a presumptive risk, one we were not willing to take. Dejected and scared, we left the house and decided to call it a day. It hadn't turned out to be the grand adventure we had hoped for, but it was certainly an experience that made us think twice about the consequences of stepping into unfamiliar territory. That would have taught us several valuable lessons: to be respectful and mindful of other people's histories and circumstances. We quickly got out of that house, thinking that we had probably almost encountered a crazed meth head who had taken up vacancy in that old house. Now, for the next 3 to 4 weeks, I would get busy with family stuff, and I would not have the time to go urban exploring with my friends. Well, they did a few solo adventures without me. I guess I shouldn't say solo, but you get the idea. Apparently, something traumatic happened to all 3 of them as they explored an old, rundown hospital not too far from where we were the night I just told you about. They tell me that they had found a large empty room with a very large pentagram made out of fresh blood, and inside was the smell of sulfur and dying, rotting flesh. Now apparently, this scared them so bad because they knew they were not alone. But fortunately, they managed to find their way out in time, and that was the end of that. I guess Rachel's aunt practices black magic, or she's a witch, or something along those lines, and so Rachel told her aunt about it, And I guess her aunt really chewed her out, telling her that she shouldn't meddle in people's business that she has no place being in. So make of that whatever you will. But yeah, those are my urban exploration stories. I had always enjoyed spending time outdoors, especially camping. Ever since I was a kid, my family and I would pack up our gear and just venture out into the wilderness just outside of San Diego. The sense of freedom and adventure that camping brought was simply unparalleled, and it just became a cherished tradition for me. So, when my girlfriend Lucy suggested that we head out camping for my birthday, I couldn't resist. We decided to go to a spot that I'd visited countless times throughout my life, a picturesque valley with forest and a crystal clear river. I knew the place like the back of my hand and had never experienced anything remotely strange or even unsettling during my past trips, but little did I know that this particular trip would forever change my perception of the forest that I'd once cherished. So, we arrived at our designated campsite, a spacious clearing surrounded by the woods. Now, as an Afghan war veteran, I knew how to set up camp efficiently and quickly. We pitched our tent, built a campfire, and started to unwind. The first day went smoothly. We hiked, we fished, and reveled in the beauty of our surroundings. The night was fairly peaceful. The air filled with nothing but the crackling of campfire and each other's laughter as we reminisced over funny stories in our past. The eeriness truly began on the second day. We decided to explore a little bit deeper, hoping to discover some hidden gems, maybe a waterfall or even a secret grove. We had been trekking for about 5 hours when we realized we had not come across any wildlife. Looking back, it was quite unusual since this lush ecosystem was always teeming with a lot of life. After all, we were near a major national park. I won't mention it, but I'll let you guess which one. But we didn't give it much thought at the time. The only creature we saw was a lone falcon circling the sky above the canyon. Now that night, as darkness began, we tucked into our sleeping bags and, after a long, tiring day, drawn from the depths of sleep, we were awakened by faint whispering. I was puzzled. This had never happened before. The whispers then seemed to morph into discernible voices, then followed by guttural yelling echoing through the trees. Now fear started sinking in, a feeling I hadn't experienced even during my time in combat. I turned to Lucy, holding her close and trying to reassure her, while I strained to make sense of the voices. My mind raced, desperate for an explanation. Were these people, or was this something more sinister? The cacophony persisted, intensifying with every passing moment. And at the edge of the firelight, something crawled past. Hunched, humanoid, with elongated limbs. It moved unnaturally, causing me to fear what was next. I didn't even consider grabbing my camera. My attention was wholly focused on keeping us safe. We spent the night in terror as the ominous presence lingered all around us. And so when daylight finally broke, we tried to shake off the fear and just resume our camping trip. But everything felt off. We had lost track of time. Hours began to feel like minutes. Minutes would stretch into hours. And we couldn't even recall what we had done during the day, and confusion then began to cloud our thoughts. More disconcerting were the false memories, vivid recollections of events that had never occurred, conversations we had not had, and bizarre thoughts that felt as if someone had forcefully implanted them into our very minds. Nothing was making sense. Now, as the third and final day approached, this sinister aura had intensified tenfold. We knew it was time to leave. We packed our belongings in a frantic rush, our only goal to leave this terrifying place behind. This once familiar and beloved place, where I'd spent so much of my life, now felt completely alien and malevolent. We left the campsite, never looking back, and we made our trek back home. Once we were back, we both spent countless hours discussing and trying to find out what we had happened to sort of make sense of it. We stumbled upon a few things. People had talked about online about aliens and UFOs, while other people had mentioned things that were similar to missing time, kind of what we experienced. Others talked about things called cryptids, like something called crawlers. They're apparently mysterious creatures that somewhat matched our experience, but we have yet to find any concrete answers. And I don't just want to flat out say it was monsters, because that just seems silly to me. Now, that dreadful trip instilled a fear deep within me. I feel like I'm marked. I've never been able to shake it. I haven't even gone camping since, and this was before the pandemic. It was just another typical evening in my small town in Southern California. The sun had set, and there was beautiful shades of orange and purple, casting long shadows on the quiet streets. I myself had just finished dinner with my family and decided to sit out on our front porch just for a few moments, enjoying the somewhat cool evening air, observing the peaceful suburban scene before me. We lived in a quiet neighborhood, the kind with a row of tidy one-story houses facing the railroad tracks that led through our town. Each home had a small garden, and children's toys and bicycles were a common sight on the sidewalks. Overall, it was a safe and laid-back community. The kind of place where everybody knew each other and nothing much ever happened. Usually, that was a comfort to me. But that night, everything changed. As I sat on the porch, I noticed a brisk wind rustling the leaves of the trees. This created an eerie soundtrack to the shadows that were now enveloping. The full moon was partially hidden behind fast-moving clouds, casting an odd and sporadic light. I was very much enjoying the stillness of the evening, savoring the almost eerie calm that descended upon the town after dark. From time to time, I could hear muffled sounds, the barking of dogs, the distant hum of a car engine, even the soft creaking of a wooden fence swaying in the breeze. But, for the most part, it was a quiet and serene night. As I leaned back in my porch chair, I found myself absent-mindedly watching the railroad tracks just across the street. The tracks were somewhat overgrown with wild grasses, shrubs, and occasional small trees jutting out from between the ties, a testament to the infrequency of trains passing through our town. I suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of apprehension, as though something was off. Something utterly unnerving was lurking just out of sight. I could sense that the dogs in the neighborhood were growing increasingly agitated, barking and howling in a manner that seemed to indicate something was amiss. Instinctively, I looked around, scanning the streets, the gardens, and the shadows cast by the swaying branches of the trees. Everything seemed perfectly normal, and yet that unsettling feeling remained. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a shadow on the tracks. Now, this wasn't just any regular shadow. It was darker than the surrounding shadows, a form that seemed to be creeping closer. At first, I thought it might be one of the neighborhood cats or perhaps a stray dog. But as it came closer, I saw that no dog or cat could compare to what I was witnessing. It was tall, maybe 6 feet or slightly less, with the head of what I would later describe as a monstrous amalgamation of a German shepherd or even a wolf. Walking deliberately and upright, like a human being. This animal's body appeared to be covered in a dark fur, which was especially thick around his upper torso. similar to an oversized black sweatshirt. However, as it drew nearer, it became unmistakably clear that it was fur, not fabric. And its eyes, those same piercing eyes, locked onto me, almost as if they were beckoning me to share their secrets, to succumb to their hypnotic lure. I found myself unable to look away from its gaze, feeling as if I was paralyzed and inexplicably drawn to this creature. My heart was now pounding out of my chest, my limbs grew cold and numb, and I leaned forward in my porch chair, watching as this thing slowly advanced towards me. This dog's head, barking, had reached a fever pitch, yet it only seemed to fuel the curiosity and determination of the approaching figure. And just as it took another step in my direction, getting closer and closer, a sudden flash of light illuminated the scene. The animal or creature paused, momentarily startled, before turning its head to look toward the source of the light. It was my father's car, coming around the bend of our street, approaching our house. Taking advantage of the animal's brief distraction, I broke from my trance, bolting through the front door, quickly locking it behind me. I could barely breathe. I felt like I was going to pass out. I firmly pressed my back against the door, hoping this thing would not break it down. I could hardly believe what I just witnessed, yet experienced, and I was left to wonder if it was a dream, a figment of my imagination, or something worse. My father arrived home only moments later, completely unaware of the terrifying encounter that had just occurred outside. I tried my best to explain what I'd seen, but my words were inadequate, just a jumble of broken sentences and vague descriptions. He dismissed my account as the product of an overactive imagination, and I soon found myself doubting my own sanity. After that night, I never saw the creature again, but days would turn to weeks, and I began to notice something that really chilled me. Directly across the street from our home stood a government installation, surrounded by high gates covered in high surveillance cameras. They would have armed guards patrolling the perimeter by day and night, their stern expressions hinting at the secrets behind those walls. Were they recording everything that happened on our street, including that night when this frightful creature emerged? I couldn't help but wonder if they had any knowledge of what I'd seen, or if they were in some way connected to its sudden appearance. Years passed and no further encounters happened, but the memories of that night will never leave me, and I often wonder what the truth really is. Was that site erected after that encounter, or was it just a mere coincidence? I'll let you decide. Thanks for hearing my story.